I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of our investigation is the tragic death of Officer Ellie Shea, who was married to another officer when she was shot and killed in her home. The question is, who pulled the trigger? In the quiet of an Orlando home, a tragedy unfolded that stunned even seasoned investigators. Lieutenant Ellie Shea, a respected Orange County Sheriff's deputy, was found shot dead in October of 2024. At first, it looked like suicide, but the investigators say the evidence whispered otherwise. Her husband, Anthony Shea, himself a former sergeant with the same agency, was soon accused of pulling the trigger and staging the scene to cover his crime. Detectives say he went further, sending text messages from Ellie's phone to his own, desperately trying to manufacture the illusion that she was still alive. Forensic clues allegedly unraveled his story. DNA on the weapon, crime scene inconsistencies, and most chilling, a 54-minute audio file on Ellie's phone, allegedly recorded after her death. Now Anthony Shea is getting ready to face a jury as he goes to trial for murder. He's on trial for murder. It seems the defense is suicide. So this is a whodunit, but it's not a murder mystery per se. Let's bring in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas, joining us live from Orlando, Florida, taking a look at everything happening here, the latest in the investigation. Cody, let's start at the death scene, and I'm not calling it a crime scene because if this is suicide, it's not a crime. So what do we know about the death scene, the place where Ellie Shea was found deceased?
Well, of course, Vinny, it was at the Shea's residence here in Orlando, about 20 to 25 minutes from where I'm standing right here at the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Now, Vinny, this death scene, it was not your typical death scene in the sense that it was chaotic. There was a lot going on. You know, police are trying to deduce whether this was a suicide or a homicide. It was bloody, it was gruesome, and in fact, in one of the body cams, you see Anthony Shea administering CPR to his dying wife, Ellie, on the floor. And we do know that her body was found on the bed, but it was moved to the floor. And of course, I mentioned him delivering that CPR, Vinny. We do have a clip that I want viewers to see, but I do want to warn them that it is pretty graphic. Let's take a look.
Sheriff's Office. Which way? Come on, shoot it! Oh, Ellie! Oh my God. Okay. Tell me. Okay, Chef. Okay, Tony. Here's one. No, FD's here. Come on. FD's here. Okay?
So, Vinny, the scene looks like, you know, a man desperately trying to save his dying wife. But the prosecution says that Anthony Shea premeditated, crafted this whole plan to intentionally kill Ellie and cover it up as this suicide. Now, at a recent bond hearing, the prosecution called a detective to the stand to outline Anthony Shea's story that he told police about what happened upon arriving home and what he says what happened when he found Ellie's body. Let's take a listen.
Did you ask him where Ellie was when he first encountered her?
Yes.
Where did he describe encountering Ms. Shea?
She was on her side of the bed, which was the side closest to the window. She was on her back, but kind of to her side, and her head was on the headboard.
Did he tell you what he did upon finding her?
He pulled her to the floor and started CPR.
Did you ask some follow-up questions about the firearm during this interview?
Yes.
And talk to the court about how the story that you got in the second interview was a bit different than the story you got in the first interview.
So initially, Anthony Shea stated he did not touch the firearm. During the second interview, he stated that he moved the firearm in order to pull her off of the bed. And he said he tossed it on the bed somewhere, but didn't know where.
Now, Vinny, that firearm they're mentioning is important because that is the alleged murder weapon according to the state. Now, they say both Ellie and Anthony Shea's DNA were found all over the gun because it was a family gun. But they also say there's one little detail, that on the trigger, only Anthony Shea's DNA is found on the trigger. Again, both are DNA on the magazine at the top of the gun where you rack it, but on the trigger, only Anthony Shea's DNA, according to the state's evidence.
Big potential fact there, Cody. You're talking about, you've got to squeeze the trigger. And if it's a suicide, you would expect her DNA to be there. All right, Cody Thomas is going to stick around throughout the hour. This all brings us to the first question in our investigation, what Cody just showed us and explained to us. What does this death scene reveal? What does it say? What does it, a lot of times experts come in and say that the scene speaks to them. What does it say? Let's bring in our special guest to help us answer this question. Former New York police officer, retired police lieutenant, and commanding officer of the Nassau County K-9 Unit, Mike Gould, is with us, and private investigator Jason Jensen. Welcome to you both. Great to have you here. I'll start with you, Mike. Let's talk about this death scene. We saw the video. He's doing CPR on his wife at the time. As we look at some of the pictures, we see a gun on the bed. We see one cell phone. There's a second cell phone on the bed, and we see lots of blood. What does this death scene reveal to you?
So thanks, Vinnie, for having me. So this is so early in this investigation, but the protocol was kind of followed, right? If you have somebody that you think shot themselves and is bleeding and you need to give CPR, you remove them from the bed, put them on the floor on a hard surface. So that's not anything that, regarding the conversation between whether he touched the gun or he didn't touch the gun, I mean, yeah, it might end up, and I'm being the devil's advocate here, but these are not really smoking gun, oh wow. So did he take the gun and throw it on the floor? Did he touch it? In this moment of trauma on his part, so the crime scene thus far doesn't really speak to me. We're going to see that the prosecutor has his theory and the defense has theirs. And I think Mark O'Mara is going to spell out explainable or reasonable doubt on all of these different circumstances.
Jason Jensen, when you see that death scene, what draws your interest? What do you think is significant? And what needs to be explained by either side?
What I find most significant about it is it's clearly a death scene where a firearm is involved. So what you're going to want to look for is where the most likely source of the gunshot was managed, where there's blowback, where there's blood spatter. You're going to want to figure out if this occurred on the bed or if the victim, the decedent, fell onto the bed where they clearly had a mass blood loss. And then apparently you can tell by the secondary blood stain on the floor that the body was moved to the floor. So there had been some involvement, some activity where the decedent had been moved, which is consistent with what Anthony Shea is saying. The question is, who pulled the trigger, given the fact that forensic shows his DNA is on the trigger. That's the crux of the prosecutor's initial claims.
Yeah. Mike, looking at, again, at the scene and the reaction to all this, I've covered so many trials through the years where the spouse who's accused does nothing, makes no attempt, and the scene is almost pristine. I remember one was Rabbi Fred Newlander found his wife bludgeoned to death and didn't touch her at all. This is the opposite of that. Which do you think, as an investigator, are you more suspicious of? A spouse who does nothing to keep the crime scene pristine, or someone who jumps in and attempts life-saving measures?
Right. Well, considering he's a police officer, this is his natural instincts to do this. So, it's a little bit different than just a civilian walking in and seeing this horrendous blood and crime scene. or death scene, as you said. So at this point, I can go either way on this, Vinny. I really think that the circumstantial, I haven't seen anything that I say, oh, wow, to. The text messages, I think that, again, Mark O'Mara is a very powerful defense attorney in Florida. He's a little intimidating. And he is going to offer his alternative theory and have reasonable doubt. If you would ask me 10 years ago if it's likely that a woman would commit suicide with a gun, I would say it's unlikely. But in the last 5 or 10 years, that's risen by 40%. So women do, in fact, shoot themselves with guns in a suicide attempt.
Yeah, and unfortunately, for men and women in law enforcement, it's not. It's a little too common, the ability to take your own life. Let's talk about the blood for a second, Jason. Because the body is moved, and there is CPR that's done, so the body is moved from the bed, which is where the gunshot presumably took place, is dragged. You see the drag mark on the bed and is placed down there. Will the bloodstain evidence or patterns mean anything?
Well, yes. I mean, what you're describing there is where there's dragging. That's the swipe. That's where an object being the body is dragged through the blood and pulled to the floor. There is going to be, though, high velocity spatter from the gunshot, and including blowback. So the question is, what kind of blood stains are on the handgun? Because remember, typically when it's a suicide, it's usually a contact GSW. It's typically not from a distance. So if there's a distance between the gun and the decedent, that makes it less and less likely it was self-inflicted.
And the other part of that, Mike, if you talk about bloodstains, if he's the suspect, does the suspect have blood on him? He's administering CPR. He has touched the body. So does that sort of negate any sort of value to bloodstains on his own clothing?
Yeah, I think it will, as well as the DNA evidence. And I understand the part about the DNA, his DNA on the trigger, and I get it. DNA, this is all going to be argued. And the experts in DNA are going to, there's a lot further to go here. One of the things I thought of, though, if he wanted to kill his wife, why didn't he just say she was going to kill herself? And he interrupted the suicide, and they fought over the gun, and it went off. To get him, that would be, to me, if I had criminal intent, that would be a little bit more logical to me, because supposedly she had suicidal tendencies, which I don't necessarily believe to be true. But why not just say, look, she had the gun in her hand, I grabbed it, it went off, and she's dead. I wanted to save her life. I didn't want to kill her.
All right, our experts are staying with us. Coming up next, was there a motive for murder?
I learned that Anthony Shea and Ellie Shea had been having relationship trouble, that he had been caught cheating.
8.5 months pregnant, a young mother found brutally murdered.
To lose a child, there's no words for it.
Now the victim's boyfriend, a married father of 4, is
charged for the murder of his alleged mistress and her unborn child.
That's one of the things that struck me. He was not remorseful.
From the first gavel to the final verdict, Court TV takes you inside the South Florida courtroom
for this tragic death penalty case.
The pregnant mistress murder trial. Live coverage Monday morning, only on Court TV.
Now he's sitting in jail. The surviving children, his 2 daughters, are now without him. Obviously, they're without their mom. Now they're without either parent. They're actually in a location with family members he doesn't want them to be with. But in effect, he's lost all parenting rights because the judge has denied bond on the case and is leaving him in jail.
That's Mark O'Mara, the attorney for Anthony Shea, defending Anthony Shea, the officer, the former sergeant, accused of the murder of his wife, who also was a deputy, an officer. They have 2 children. This was a family. And now dad is accused of murdering mom. Now, crucial to this case and this trial, which is upcoming early next year here on Court TV, is the relationship between the victim and the defendant, between the mom and the dad, the husband and wife. Take a listen to Detective Christopher Gilberti testifying about what was going on in that relationship.
I learned that Anthony Shea and Ellie Shea had been having relationship trouble, that he had been caught cheating, and they were having a tough time with their relationship. The night before this happened, they went to church. There was an argument at church which continued when they got home. So they argued till about 3 in the morning, and after the argument, they had intercourse, then they went to sleep. When they woke up in the morning, Ellie Shea was feeling drained from the emotional aspect of the argument, so she called out sick from work. And according to Anthony Shea, she stayed in bed all day, not feeling well.
Was Ms. Hilly able to offer some insight into Ellie's outlook on her marriage with the defendant?
Yes.
What outlook was she able to offer?
She was adamant that she wanted to get a divorce. She believed there could be some sort of relationship so that the children would have both parents in the picture, but she was adamant that they were going to separate and divorce.
And the prosecutor there was referencing Miss Hilly, who's a witness in all this, who's a friend of Ellie Shea's, the victim in the case, her friend. So apparently the mom, the mother, the wife, Ellie, was speaking with her friend about the state of that relationship. Let's bring in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas, who's on the case down in Orlando, Florida. Cody, what is the defense saying about the state of that relationship?
Well, of course, Vinny, these were two people who were once happily married at one time. They share 2 daughters together. They both worked right here for a number of years at the Orange County Sheriff's Office together. In fact, Anthony Shea worked here from 2006 to late 2024, so 18 years before resigning due to an internal affairs investigation into an affair that he was having while on the job. Now, of course, Ellie eventually found out about this affair. She ended up wanting a divorce. Anthony Shea wanted to make it work. So they began having somewhat of a rift in their relationship. Now, I sat down with Anthony Shea's defense attorney, high-profile defense attorney Mark O'Mara, and what he was telling me, Vinny, is that in his years of experience, discord in a relationship does not always point to motive for murder. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Yes, they were having difficulties. My guy was having an affair. She found out about it. And by the way, Internal Affairs was looking into it and kept sticking every piece of evidence that they could down her throat, which I think is wholly inappropriate. But yes, they had that. They had domestic disputes and domestic discord. Great, okay. But since we now know that 60% of the people, or more than 50% of the people, end up in some type of marital discord and divorce, okay. Does that mean that 50% plus kill their spouses? No. What we're going to say is now that we've taken, the patina off and we're looking at the relationship itself, discord, therefore death. No, that just doesn't happen. Again, one of those premises, right, where we say discord, so he killed her. Well, no, because the percentages don't bear any of that out. Now, are there cases where there's discord and then there's a death? Of course there is. But what I don't like and what I resist are these premises thrown out by the state to say these are conclusive when they are the opposite.
And Vinny, Mr. O'Mara also went on to tell me that he has yet to see any definite, hard forensic evidence, that gotcha evidence that he sees in his eyes is strong enough to convict his client.
All right, Cody Thomas standing by in Orlando on the case tonight. And all this evidence and testimony about the relationship brings us to the next question in our investigation. Was there a motive for murder? He's accused of murdering his wife. He's accused of murdering the mother of his children. Was there a motive? Still with us here to help answer the question. Former New York police officer, retired police lieutenant, commanding officer, Nassau County Police K-9 Unit Mike Gould, and private investigator Jason Jensen. Jason, what are your thoughts about motive here?
Well, the statistics aside that Mark O'Mara was talking about, what we do know is in most households where there's an abuser, that is indeed the most dangerous time for a woman to leave the relationship, because we know 80% of the time it ends up in some kind of assault and sometimes even death.
Mike, what are your thoughts here about motive? This is, I mean, like we're talking about murder here. We're talking about taking a gun, shooting and killing your wife, the mother of your young children.
Yeah. So I agree with what Jason's saying. So very often there's underlying violence. She had an order of protection against him for violent threats of having her raped or something. That all came out in the bond hearing. So I think singularly there is no evidence here beyond that's going to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. I think what's going to happen, because I think Mark O'Mara is going to tear apart each one of these circumstantial points that the prosecutor is going to make. So motives are, you know, it's not unusual for a domestic violence situation to turn into a murder. The emotions are heated. They have a history of relationship problems going on for 10 years. So it's not something new. There's a history, there's a pattern. So, but these things, it's not a question of guilt or innocence. It's a question, can the prosecutor prove these beyond a reasonable doubt? I'm always confounded by relationships. I don't know why people just don't do what I do. Get divorced when you're in an unhappy situation. So I don't know how it escalates to these things, but it's going to be interesting. It's early on in this investigation, and there's a long road ahead of us.
All right, Jason, let me ask you. These are police officers, both. The affair is an internal affairs investigation. Makes things very tense because everyone's kind of close to one another. Does that, from your perspective, add to the level of intensity of the problems in this relationship?
Yes, many times officers have egos, and his reputation's on the line. If there's an internal affairs that concludes against him, that can have long-lasting impacts against his pension, as well as reemployment elsewhere.
All right, big thanks to Mike Gold, Jason Jensen. We appreciate your insight, expertise. Up next, what does the timeline tell us? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the tragic death of Officer Ellie Shea. Her marriage had problems and things were not easy for her. And when she died, it appeared to be suicide. But now her husband is charged with murder. Here's the story. The case of Anthony and Ellie Shea has shaken Florida law enforcement to its core. Ellie, a beloved lieutenant with the Orange County Sheriff's Office, was found dead in her Orlando home, a gunshot wound, ending the life of a woman admired for her strength, her faith, and dedication. Her husband, Anthony Shea, once a sergeant in the same department, now stands accused of her murder. Prosecutors allege he staged the scene to resemble suicide, even sending text messages from Ellie's phone to his own to keep the illusion alive. Forensic evidence, audio recordings, and DNA on the weapon are expected to take center stage when the trial begins. The courtroom will pit his claims of innocence against the weight of digital trails and chilling details. Once respected colleagues, now divided by betrayal and death, the Shea's story is poised to become one of Florida's most haunting trials in recent memory. All right, putting together the pieces here, there's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of layers to this story. There's the relationship that's going on, but then there's the forensic evidence and the digital evidence and the timeline of what is happening. Let's bring back in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas on the case tonight, live from Orlando, Florida, where all this is happening. Cody, let's talk about timeline. You know, when I cover a story, I cover a case. It's one of the things I always like to try to get clear in my mind to figure out where the discrepancies are, you know, what happened in what order, what do we know for sure, what don't we know. So what do we know about the timeline leading up to the tragic death of Ellie Shea?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Vinny. In order to understand what was going on that day from start to finish. We got to break it down in the timeline like we always do here at Court TV. So we have one for this October day in 2024 when this went down. So we look at it, and it starts at 7:29 a.m. Ellie calls out sick from work. She calls out sick. 12:46 p.m. Ellie did an online search for, quote, "I'm a cop and my husband sexually assaulted me." 1:31 p.m. The audio recording device is activated on Ellie's phone. 1:33 p.m. Anthony leaves for Publix. 2 o'clock p.m. in the afternoon, Anthony returns from Publix. 2:09 in the afternoon, Anthony texts Ellie saying that he's downstairs. 2:11 p.m., Anthony walks down 2 flights of stairs. 2:12 p.m. in 3 seconds, Anthony turns on his phone's flashlight. 2:12 p.m. in 12 seconds, Anthony calls 911. And at 2:18 and 2 seconds, Vinnie, in the afternoon, deputies arrive at the house. Now, of course, we've talked about this recent bond hearing for Anthony Shea, in which the judge did deny his bond, but that detective that the prosecutors called to the stand, he talked about and presented evidence about Anthony Shea's final texts to Ellie from his phone to her phone. The first of those final texts taking place just 24 minutes before the 911 call is made. Take a listen.
The Brussels, Tony, I can't do this anymore. Please understand it's too much. What you did to me, I can't anymore. Take the girls for a drive. Give me space, please. We just left. The girls tried to come upstairs. You locked the door. I'm sorry about last night and what I said. I know this investigation and all the I've caused has us both depressed. I think the word at church yesterday was fitting. Whether we sell the house, don't sell, whatever you want, I will do. I love you. Get some sleep, my love. Want me to bring a guava con queso for dessert?
Now, Vinnie, we've heard a lot about this 54-minute audio recording that was taken on Ellie's phone. What's on it? You don't hear a gunshot on it during that window of time. Here's what Anthony Shea's defense had to say about that audio recording that seems to be the cornerstone of the state's case. Take a listen.
The state is saying there's 54 minutes of silence, and therefore there could have not been a gunshot during that 54 minutes, and therefore it had to be before, therefore it had to be him. That's what they're saying. And I understand their position, which is why I'm saying their entire state case is resting on the cornerstone of that audio, right? And I think if I asked the prosecutor right now, they would say, oh, this is our biggest piece of evidence. Well, great. Let's see how long that evidence is as significant as they believe it to be. They suggest concrete evidence, it's not there. Well, let's just wait and see.
And again, Vinnie, the defense believes this case is built on nothing more than assumptions and circumstantials versus pinpointed forensic evidence against Anthony Shea.
Let me just follow up quickly, Cody, on this issue of the recording, just to make it clear. Is the allegation by the state that the recording on her phone begins after she is dead?
That is exactly the state's allegation, Vinnie. They say a text message, which they allege was Anthony Shea on her phone sending a text to himself to make it seem like he was somewhere else. They say that he inadvertently hit the audio recording button. The recording started for 54 minutes, and you don't hear a gunshot on there. So what does that likely imply? That she was probably dead before that recording started.
I get it. Cody Thomas, thanks so much. Stick it around. That brings us to the next question in our investigation. This is an important one, right? What does the timeline tell us here? Especially in light of this recording. Here to help answer that question is crime scene analyst Dr. Kenneth Kinsey and criminal defense attorney Lauren Johnson Norris. Thank you both for being here. Dr. Kinsey, an inadvertent recording on a cell phone. I've heard that before in another case, haven't I?
Yes, you have, Vinny. Sometimes it's promising at first, but you never know what's going to come out. We only have preliminary.
Right. So What are your thoughts, Ken, about the timeline here? If you have a recording that goes for 54 minutes, you don't hear a gunshot. It's the phone of the victim. Is that enough for you to say, wait a minute, there's no way that that gunshot could have been after the recording?
Well, Vinny, I believe that starts feeding the theory. But as I mentioned, there's so many aspects of this digital world, and digital evidence has become so important because that's what our society demands. We use it so often. And I would throw out some caution. We know the initial part. We know the allegation of that space, but there are so many other aspects to that. And I would probably caution it, because what are we going to find out with other features, airdrop, phones tethered together, movement? There's so many other things that are going to come out later that take a little bit more time to retrieve. So it's promising. I believe it's still subjective.
Lauren Johnson Norris, what are your thoughts about this timeline? Because it seems like prosecutors are going to lean on it, right? They want to be able to tell the story to the jury. They want it to make sense. You put together a timeline. They're talking about text messages, and what they're saying is the death happens, the shooting happens, and then there's activity on her phone, not from her, but from him, and they believe so because of the recording on her phone.
Well, jurors love to hear timelines. They want to understand a story from beginning to end. So, of course, the prosecution is going to present it in a way that is their timeline, their explanation of how they think the events unfolded. At the end of the day, they're going to have to prove it up, and that means bringing in the forensic experts to show that the times they're claiming these events occurred actually occurred at those times. We see in other cases that sometimes the experts aren't even correct when they approximate times. We'd like to think it's a science, but when we are recreating a timeline, there's a question about whether or not it can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt.
Let me ask you, Ken, about this evidence about walking downstairs. They say they have a time frame for that, walking down a flight of stairs prior to calling 911, turning the flashlight on the phone. Do you believe some of this stuff will end up telling the story and painting a picture like you painted inside that courtroom down in the Low Country of what Alec Murdaugh was doing when he murdered his family?
Vinny, if the methodology is strong enough with the other physical evidence and it can be corroborated by the timeline, and as my co-guest mentioned, there's two tails with that timeline, and it depends on how strong it is and how it can be verified, and if the other physical evidence from this case will tie in to tell that story.
Let me ask you, Lauren, what is going to resonate with this jury? Is it going to be the story of what was going on in the relationship? Is it going to be the digital evidence? Which do you think will have more impact on the people who must decide what happened here?
I think both. I think the story of the relationship sort of colors the tale and gives the context for the prosecution's theories of these events. But I have to say, we see more and more jurors holding the government to very high standards. When they bring very serious charges against people, they need to connect the dots in every which way. Or the defense will say they just have missed a spot, they've missed an element, and they haven't proven to you a perfect case. We're seeing jurors really want it all to make sense to them across the board.
Yeah, we saw that up in Massachusetts in the Karen Reed case, and we know what the jury said there. Okay, our guests are staying with us. Still to come, real important question. Is it clear if this was a homicide or a suicide?
When someone says to me, well, she said 2 months before that she would never commit suicide, you know what I say? I say she's thinking about suicide.
Saturday nights on ION is our night. Let's go! Double headers every Saturday at 7 and 10 p.m. Eastern. Saturday Night Out is on ION all season long.
We're taking you inside the investigations of the country's biggest cases. Join us each morning as we dig deeper into what's trending in true crime.
Opening statements with Julie Grant. Mornings at 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
When someone says to me, well, she said 2 months before that she would never commit suicide, you know what I say? I say she's thinking about suicide. Why are you talking about suicide if you're not thinking about it? Why are you saying that? If that's what she did was commit suicide, which is the defense position, then at some point she thought in her own mind that that was a rational thought process. I don't know why she thought that, but it seems as though she did.
Anthony Shea's attorney, Mark O'Mara, pointing out the theory of the case for the defense, which is this is not murder, this is suicide. She was talking about suicide. She was saying she was not going to do it, but it was part of the conversation she was having. I want to bring back in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas on the case down in Orlando. Cody, let's talk about the evidence here. What is the evidence that we're talking about in this case? Because murder versus suicide, what are we talking about?
Well, Vinnie, I did my best to decipher 213 pages of the medical examiner's report, which, of course, in those first few pages, we have it right here, outlines that the cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head and the manner of death was homicide. Now, how did the state and the medical examiner come to this conclusion? Well, as I was skimming through on page 171 of 213, they did a gunshot residue test on Anthony Shea. Now, 3 things were important here from the results. They say gunshot residue was not found on his hands, but gunshot residue was found on his shirt, and it was found on the steering wheel and shifter of their Kia Telluride. And Vinnie, we also have a picture or a drawing that was outlined in that medical examiner's report of the path of the projectile. Now, they say the bullet entered Ellie's head from left to right, front to back, and then slightly downward, so kind of in a slant-like pattern. But important to note about that projectile, Vinnie, is that the bullet did not exit her skull, which likely suggests that it was a smaller caliber weapon used in Ellie's death.
Cody Thomas reporting for us down in Orlando. Great work as always. Thank you so much. You know, the medical examiner report here, obviously significant, everything else. You put the pieces together, and it brings us to this very, very important question, which I think is the ultimate question in this case. Is it clear if this was a homicide or a suicide? We know one side has the burden, but is there any clarity here? Are there arguments on both sides? Is there evidence on both sides? Here to help with our investigation, crime scene analyst Dr. Kenneth Kinsey. You know him well, the star of the Alec Murdaugh trial. Also joining us, board-certified forensic pathologist Dr. Priya Banerjee, who we bumped into and spent some time with out at CrimeCon this year. Great to see you. Before we answer the question, I want to just give you a little bit more information. I want you to take another look here at some of the body cam video from responding officers at the death scene as they walk in, and the defendant is doing CPR on the victim. Let's take a look.
Okay. Tell me, read. Okay, Shay. Okay, Tony. Here, Tony. No, FD's here. Come on. FD's here.
Also want to show you some of the images from the bed. Obviously, Ellie Shea was on the floor for CPR. This is what's on the bed. The gun is on the bed. You've got blood stains on the bed. You've got the cell phones on the bed as well. All right, Dr. Priya Banerjee, is it clear if this was a homicide or a suicide, and what provides clarity, or what would be needed for clarity here?
So I want to sort of talk on 2 points. One is I haven't read the autopsy report, so I'm curious to see, because the drawing was a little unclear, if there was any stippling involved. Okay, when they did the entrance wound, it looked like it was they're hinting that it was contact, which would be consistent with the suicide, but there's also small dots around the entrance wound on the drawing. You can see the right temple above the ear. And that makes me just wonder, I haven't seen autopsy photos. Of course, this is an interpretation, right? The photos would be more clear, I think, as well as the report. So that makes me wonder if it's hard contact. That's usually what I see in suicide. If there's some stippling, then the gun is not pressed up against the head, which is a little atypical. The other thing that I caution about in gunshot residue is that these are both police officers that handle guns, right? And then he touches her body after she's been shot or, from whatever manner we're talking about, but a gun has been discharged on her. So I do caution about people that regularly handle guns, their clothing, their hands, the environment can have gunshot residue. So that's not as accurate to say whether it doesn't say, oh, it was from this event or that event. If he's working and handling a weapon, the residue looks the same basically from any weapons that's been fired at any point. So that's where the caution comes in using that data. The DNA is very compelling.
Dr. Kenneth Kinsey, from your perspective, we got the death scene. We've got a defendant who is doing CPR, so she's not in the place where she died. She's on the floor, not on the bed. You've got the angle of the projectile that doesn't exit the skull. Is it giving you any clarity one way or the other?
The ship has left the port, Vinny, but we haven't reached the destination. When you're talking about the mechanics of a gunshot wound, as the doctor mentioned, you're looking at a distance determination from soot or stippling, but also you've got a lot of things going on there when interacting with the blood will tell us something. Here we're looking at general photographs. Hopefully these bed linens were preserved and analyzed by a bloodstain interpreter. But with the firearm itself, you've got momentum, you've got pressure, you've got the transfer of kinetic energy, and then you've got the recoil. So those ballistics are going to tell us something because blood reacts consistently in certain ways. And hopefully it's a science that one side's going to fight real hard to get it approved and get it in. And unfortunately, the other side's going to fight. I find it more and more common. The other side's going to fight to keep it out. So I'm interested. We're going to stay tuned, and hopefully that blood stain, those blood stains will give us some information in the future.
Absolutely. A big thank you. We're just starting to unravel this case. Obviously, we're going to continue to cover it as the trial gets closer and closer, scheduled for early 2026. Dr. Priya Banerjee, great to see you in person, and great to see you tonight on the show. Dr. Kenneth Kinsey, always a pleasure to have your expertise helping us through all this. All right. Regardless of what you think about how Ellie Shea died, this case is incredibly tragic. Her children have suffered a devastating loss. I cannot imagine growing up without my mom. That's a real difficult, tough one to even fathom. Now, the question is, will these children also grow up without a dad? I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.